Let's go to Peter Mathews. He is professor at Cypress College, and we have him here as a regular political analyst. Welcome back, Professor.
How are you doing, my friend, David?
I'm doing well, thank you. So, were you surprised not at the outcome, but at the gap of votes going for Garcetti over Greuel, the percentage?
I think that was a bit unexpected. The margin was 8%, and that's quite huge, Dave. It's almost called a landslide in some sense. You know what I think happened? I mean, Garcetti did very well on the west side, on the east side, East L.A., and the San Fernando Valley was the key. He also did well in South L.A., but Wendy Greuel beat him in South L.A. The San Fernando Valley was so hot in the last month or so, people were out there watering their lawns, my friend, much more, and having air conditionings up. And guess who charges people water and power rates? It's the DWP, right?
Yep.
The DWP was supporting Wendy Greuel all the way, and I think she suffered from that, believe it or not. The weather had an impact in the San Fernando Valley, and that was part of the gap, because in the Valley, it was a dead-even split when it should have been Gruel's territory all the way. And people were just sick of those higher bills. Even though they had to use the energy up, but the bills were going to be high, they were still pissed off about it. I think that's what happened to a certain extent, believe it or not. And back east, the weather, too much snow can be a problem in an election. This time it was too much sun.
Well, interesting. Peter, we have talked about how, to me, neither candidate seemed to come up with what I would call that overarching championing of the city of L.A. I heard last night in Garcetti's speech, Mayor-elect Garcetti, he was trying to get people to think in those terms of the renaissance of L.A., a greater Los Angeles. Does he have the charisma and what it takes, the gravitas, if you will, to get people to believe in that? What do you think?
I think he's going to grow in the job, to be honest with you. He's a man who's got a tremendous experience. He's traveled the world. He's done work in Ethiopia. He knows how to reach out to less advantaged people and help them have a chance. But I think his personality is also a good guy. People like him. He needs to be a little bit more firm about things, what he believes in, come out with clear plans. He's going to have to create jobs. He's going to have to try to create jobs at least, especially since we lost manufacturing and aerospace jobs in large numbers. He's going to have to fix the economy by bringing in more tech jobs, perhaps, trying to give tax incentives to business to locate here, high-tech businesses, job training. And don't forget the potholes, Dave. Your favorite thing about left turn signals?
Yep.
There's too many potholes in sidewalks. 5,000 miles of sidewalk have to be repaired in L.A. So there's a lot of specifics that people want from him while he's still trying to inspire them to a larger picture, a vision for the city. He'll have to take care of the specifics as well. I think he might be able to grow in the office, in my view.
Interesting. All right. And I just mentioned it as a passing item. To bring Gil Cedillo onto the city council, I think the voters are saying that at least for that district, they wanted someone they knew and someone they feel is going to champion them. And Gil Cedillo, a lot of people have scoffed at him, saying that he's been one Bill Gil because he's focused on driver's licenses and that kind of thing. Yeah, I kind of admire his gumption for sticking it out. But
absolutely.
As we go towards immigration reform, having a guy like Gil Cedillo represent probably the most congested district in the city of L.A., this could position him well for something in the future.
Especially if he helps with the implementation of immigration reform, and he's seen as a champion of people who've come here for a better opportunity, and I think he's the right person at the right time for that district. And with immigration reform going through Congress pretty soon here, I think he'll be in good shape for something in the future. Absolutely. He's a man who's not just a one-issue man. He came across that way because of his championing of the driver's licenses, but he's got a lot of good ideas about progressive politics for the state as well.
No doubt about it. So Steve Lopez, the columnist for the L.A. Times, calls the unions the big loser in last night's election. Do you read it that way? It's always interesting how, they say politics makes for strange bedfellows. People can be political foes one night, the best of friends the next morning. So how, then, does labor kiss and make up with the other side and still continue to be that player in the city politics here in L.A.?
Steve Lopez has a point. I read the column as well, and it is true. There are also different types of unions. DWP union is one of the better paid unions, and that's what people resented, unfortunately, because of the budget problems. And yet you have low-wage worker unions, SEIU.
Yes.
Janitors, working people who don't even make a living wage right now. We need to have a living wage ordinance passed and pushed through. That would be even a better wage. Because, Dave, the minimum wage has lost so much purchasing power that if it kept up with inflation all these years, it would actually be $19 an hour right now, Dave. So to help small business, what I would suggest, what government should do is lower the taxes on small business, give them subsidies to help them compensate for paying a higher living wage for workers. That would create demand in the economy, and that would be much fairer. Whereas the biggest businesses need to pay, in terms of the corporate loopholes I can keep harping on. You heard about Apple, right, just recently?
Yes, of course.
Apple avoided $15 billion in taxes by offshoring. We were talking about that the other day.
That is just shameless.
Yeah, so he's going to have to focus on the small businesses and some of the more private sector unions that need help and bring in a new economy, living wages for janitors, job training programs. I would suggest that he works with state and federal governments because the city doesn't have enough money generally. A lot of American cities are reliant on a lot of transfer money from the state and federal government, and they have to make sure that comes in. And, California is saying, the Legislative Analyst's Office said there's $6 billion extra coming in. What I think we should do with that money is set up something like a Small Business Administration for California, CSBA, I call it.
When we do that, I want to set you up in charge of that. How's that?
I will love to be in charge. We'll work on that, buddy. We'll do it.
Hey, listen, I love Steve's final paragraph. This was a vote against labor, against the chamber, against ex-mayor Richard Riordan, and many of the other poobahs who think they ought to be running this city.
I think Steve Lopez was right on because it was an anti-establishment vote in that way, and I think Garcetti's got something going for him in that regard.
I want to let our listeners know we're going to bring back our professor, Peter Mathews from Cypress College, political analyst, longtime television pal as well, in the next hour, because we have a warning coming from the Fed about our economic situation. Professor, take a breather. We'll bring you back next hour. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be there with you. See you.
All right, Professor Peter Mathews. Peter Mathews on the line. Peter, thank you for waiting while I, yacked away.
Good to be back, Dave.
All right, Peter, you were with us in the earlier hour when we talked, of course, about the mayoral election, but I wanted to get your thoughts on what the Fed is saying today, saying that we can't pull the plug yet on continuing to stimulate the economy because we have to make sure that this unemployment situation is not the new norm in America. How do you read the chairman's statements, Bernanke?
Well, I read that he's not quite certain yet which way the jobs market is going, and he's waiting on that because the Fed has been buying about $85 billion of U.S. bonds, Treasury bonds, every month, Dave. That means it's lending the government money, and when the government pays it back with interest, it's accumulating a lot of surplus. The Fed has a lot of money. In fact, it's got $3 trillion assets right now sitting in it.
Well,
what I'm saying is Bernanke's not certain which way to go yet till he's sure the jobs market is picking up.
Yeah, and that's why it's been a no-brainer for people who are investing on Wall Street because, you've got a co-signer there. It's the Fed. They're the guys who are pumping up the economy.
That's right. So we want real growth that comes from workers having enough money in their hands, good jobs. They can go out and buy the products that they need and then stimulate more production. That's the real growth. The Fed can't keep on doing this artificially pumping up the economy by buying Treasury bonds. It's just doing it temporarily.
I used to have a bad battery in my car, and every time it died, I'd just, stick out my cables to see who would take pity on me and give me a jump. We can't keep doing that to the economy. It's got to be able to move on its own. What is it going to take, Peter? Professor, what is it going to take?
I've said it before over and again, it's going to take creating more jobs, and if you have to, get some money into the hands of small businesses so they can hire people. Also, let's have some public works, Dave. We could bring in some government money to rebuild these bridges and all this, this infrastructure which we need to rebuild, and then we can, bridges and roads and things that are falling apart, and put people to work. But also, we need to have some direct employment, I would say. We could rehire those firefighters, those teachers that have been laid off, those police officers. And you got to have stimulus that way, Dave. That's real jobs,
Well, you just left,
jobs.
But you left out one portion of the market that I care about, the small business owners. Maybe you said it and I missed it.
No, I said it. Absolutely.
Oh, did you?
The money should be brought in for a small business loan.
Give
them entrepreneurial capital to start up, and also not just start up businesses, but to expand them once they get them. You've got to get small businesses rolling.
I was talking to the L.A. Times editorial board yesterday on behalf of the Latin Business Association, and one of the things we talked about is this crazy idea that some are floating about AB 880 that would essentially require anyone who employs let's say, well, they start off at companies of 500 or more employees, but here's the short of it. If you work more than 8 hours, whether it's a nonprofit or an employer, they must provide you health care. And look, I'm as concerned about the little guy as anybody, but here's the deal. I want to see job creation, and if you keep saddling these things with so many additional attachments to begin, I don't see companies wanting to hire.
It's going to be a burden on them, especially on smaller and medium-sized businesses. That's why, Dave, I supported a single-payer, nonprofit Medicare for All system that would be much more efficient. That way you take the burden of health care off the backs of business and do it something like Canada does. It's a great system. We do it for the elderly here. I think President Obama should have pushed that. I know it would have been tough to get it through, but his reform is going to hurt some small businesses to start with, and that's a problem. It's going to cut into job creation, and it's going to be layoffs. Like you said, cutting back on hours, right? Some businesses are going to cut back on the hours that they hire their employees. It's happening in the colleges, too. Some part-time instructors will be cut back on the number of courses that they're offered to teach because the district doesn't want to pay their health care, and that's a real shame. That's a negative aspect of the Obamacare the way it is.
Well, I'll tell you,
some positive aspects.
On the other side, I would tell anyone who's listening that if they go into the health care field right now, they're going to be, I have daughters who are in the healthcare field, and it's probably one of the most in-demand professions because as the boomers age, Professor, you and I both know, healthcare is going to be all the more important.
It's high demand. In fact, the nursing program at Cypress College is impacted. Students are waiting, qualified to get in, but have to wait for years to get in.
Is that right?
If we could have more nurses that are trained, they would go right to work and there'd be jobs for them. So we shouldn't import the nurses just from the Philippines or South Africa. We've got to train our own nurses here. So you're right. The healthcare field has a positive side to it right now as well.
So leave me with
we want to make sure small business can do well, Dave. That's important.
Leave me with a closing thought for the average listener who says, I'm not a small business owner, I'm an employee. What can I do to somehow get a little bit further ahead today, this week, this month, this year? Do you have anything? I know you're not an investment advisor, but since you survey so much of the fiscal landscape, the financial landscape, what would be a good fiscal plan for an average family or an individual?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say when you're not getting a whole lot of income, but whatever they can set aside and maybe expand, and get into a second job. That's a horrible thing to have to suggest, a second job, Dave, but this is an economy that has not been cranked up yet like FDR did. Mm-hmm. We've got to have some more New Deal, a new type of New Deal that will crank up the economy, especially through small business and employing people. So I don't know what to say to individuals except, try to do the best you can. If mom may have to go to work, and that would be awful if she's actually helping out with the family, or maybe a daughter will have to work in the family and stay at home and live there, which is what's happening right now, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And that's where we need some real leadership in government, some economic leadership. I'm hoping the president will take bold initiatives, and the Fed will not. You can't rely just on pumping up the Fed's money.
Right. Hey,
that's artificial stimulus. It may work temporarily, but it's not real growth.
That's why I should have become a professor. Thank you, Professor Peter Mathews from Cypress College.
Come to my class anytime and lecture. We'll love to listen to you.
I thank you very much. All right, Professor Peter Mathews at Cypress College.